All right, so after Van Buren becomes president and people think they're going to get more Jackson, a panic happens. This is the Panic of 1837. Understand that this is the same panic that brings Moses and Stephen Austin to come to Texas. All right, this is the same thing that begins some of the colonization in Texas because people are getting out of the United States because it's a bad time. All right, so a financial panic strikes just as Van Buren takes office, and this is because of what Jackson had done to the bank. All right, it's not Van Buren's fault. This is as a direct result of what was going on beforehand. So when the bank closed, control over state banks had disappeared also. Now there's nobody to regulate who gets loans, and so the banks made bad loans. They issued some huge loans and made bad loans, and the government begins to doubt the value of the banks, and they stopped accepting loans as payment for land. I mean, it was just something that spiraled terribly out of control. The public started to doubt the value of the loans, which causes an economic panic. All right, so it was a disaster. And again, I want to please state again that this is not Van Buren's fault. It's probably not even 100% Jackson's fault. It's one of these things where Jackson has an idea, just like many presidents do. He follows through on the idea, not seeing that there's unintended consequences to it. This happens a lot sometimes. I mean, I wouldn't say a lot, but it happens. Presidents have ideas or people have ideas, and the ideas themselves aren't bad, but there are unintended consequences, which is what happened here. And this thing goes into a full-fledged depression, which is an intense economic downturn. This is when people lose jobs. It's a bad thing. So what happens is thousands of these banks fail. Businesses close. Workers lose jobs. People can't afford food or rent because you don't have a job. Okay, so it's a bad thing. And so Van Buren doesn't act to do anything about this really quickly because he believes in something called laissez-faire. Do you see that in black in the third bullet point? It's a French term, laissez-faire. And that means to leave it alone. Leave it alone. Van Buren's idea was to leave this thing alone and it will work itself out, which is true. Things usually do work themselves out. But you can also sometimes tinker with things around the edges and sometimes bring these economic problems to a close a little bit quicker sometimes. Not all the time. Sometimes the tinkering makes them worse. And so, he's thinking, I'm just going to leave this alone and maybe it'll work itself out. He persuades Congress to create an independent federal treasury. All right. So, and we still have that. It's called the Fed. And this makes it so that the government no longer has to place the nation's money in private banks, which is probably a good idea. We don't want that money just floating around hither and thither. And it prevents the state and private banks from using government money to support their loans, which in turn prevents a further bank crisis. So that does help out some, okay? That helps out a little bit. All right. Then there's this thing called the Second Declaration of Independence. Because this act allowed the government to better control the public's finances, Van Buren called the federal treasury law the Second Declaration of Independence. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but that's what he called it. All right. Van Buren's party and the Whigs disagree on the decision. Of course, naturally they do. They're from opposite parties. And it also split the Democratic Party. And their lack of unity, so, okay, you've got the Whigs as one party, you've got the Democrats as another party, but inside the Democratic Party, there's also a split now. And this split allows the Whigs to get the upper hand in the 1840 election, because the Democratic Party in that election, they don't know what to do with themselves. They're all, they wanted more Jackson, and they didn't get more Jackson. This thing is called the Log Cabin Campaign. Oh, look, it's William Henry Harrison. My gosh, he was a war hero in the War of 1812. I told you he was going to be president. All right, so these Whigs get Harrison to be their candidate, and they use the reference Tippecanoe because he was the hero at the Battle of Tippecanoe, remember? So they call him Old Tippecanoe. And they use this campaign slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, because his running mate is John Tyler. All right, so that's their campaign slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. All right, so this campaign would be very similar to something you would see today, all right? They need the support of the farmers and the people who vote for Jackson because they know they need this, even though you would think that that's not a natural home because those people would mostly vote for Democrats, all right? So they portray Harrison as a simple frontiersman. He's just like Jackson. He's from the other party, but he's just like Jackson. You know, Van Buren wasn't, but this guy is. But in reality, Harrison's a wealthy man from Ohio. He's very wealthy. Democrats soon realize that they realize this image is phony, and they criticize Harrison, and they say all he's good for is sitting in front of his log cabin. But the Whigs turn this into their favor, and they say, yes, he's got his log cabin, and they call it the Log Cabin Campaign. And that became the symbol for Harrison's campaign because, after all, if you're sitting in front of a log cabin, you can't possibly be wealthy. So it kind of turned into a bad thing for the Democrats. They shouldn't have used log cabin. They should have used some sort of palatial estate. All right. And again, my little things are outside the frame. I'm not sure why this PowerPoint is not formatted correctly. All right. So the Whigs present Harrison as a man of the people. And what do they say about Van Buren? Well, he's nothing but a wealthy snob with perfumed whiskers. Well, at least that's points for creativity. And he's blamed for the Depression. Now, that's not really his fault, all right? He's accused of spending tax dollars on expensive furniture for the White House, which I don't know if he did or not. I'm not that well researched on Van Buren. I only know that he was not more Jackson, and that was his biggest problem. And so their tactics did the trick, though. If you look at the Electoral College map up there, the yellow is William Henry Harrison, and the blue is Martin Van Buren. You can see he got most of the votes, and he won the presidency and became the first Whig president. There's not a whole lot of Whigs, but he is one of them. All right, it's short-lived, though, because on the day of his inauguration in 1841, it was very cold, and he chose to deliver his speech without a coat because, by golly, he was a general, and he could do that. And he got pneumonia and died 32 days later. It was the shortest presidency ever, and it was the longest inaugural speech ever. So his vice president, John Tyler, becomes president and becomes the first person to gain the presidency because of a president's death. And at age 50, he was also the nation's youngest president. Okay, so William Henry Harrison, did he have much effect on anything that went on in the nation? No, but it is interesting about the log cabin campaign. It's something that you probably should know about. All right, so let's talk about John Tyler. Don't you love the dog? John Tyler became president as a Whig, but he had been formerly a Democrat. So in other words, okay, let's pay attention. Tyler had been part of Jackson's party, but now he was president as a Whig. The Whigs let him run with Harrison to attract the Southern voters. They're like, okay, you can run along with Harrison, even though you're not really a Whig, you're really a Democrat, but if you're going to come and join us, we know we'll get some of the Southern vote if you come along, all right? So now, though, he's president. The Whigs didn't count on that, all right? And Tyler ends up opposing many of the Whig policies because at heart he's really what? He's really a Democrat. And his lack of loyalty, upsets many of the Whigs. And almost all of his cabinet members resign when he vetoes a bill to renew the bank. Oh, guess what? He's fighting against the bank just like Jackson did. Actually, he's more Jackson than Van Buren was. All right. And so due to his betrayal, Tyler is expelled from the Whig Party because he's crazy like the dog up in the corner. All right. Some of the things that happened under Tyler's presidency, though, that you do need to know about. One of these things was the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. What does this give us? Oh, gosh, my thing is really badly formatted. Sorry. All right, so the U.S. and Great Britain signed the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, and that gives us the border between Maine and Canada. All right. It also gives us the boundary that creates a border all the way between Maine and Minnesota. So that's, and I'll do better with this. I'll try to show you better in class on this map. All right, so Webster-Ashburton, that's something good that happens under Tyler's presidency. And the end of the Whigs is near. Besides uniting against Tyler, the Whigs continued to disagree on party goals, so they can't come together. More and more Whigs voted by region and not by party. So they tend to clump up if they're Northerners or Southerners or Midwesterners. And this division explains why the Whig Henry Clay lost the election of 1844 to the Democrat James Polk. Henry Clay is he runs as almost everything. He's tried to run so many different ways now, and he's tried to get the election by so many different back channels and so much different maneuvering, and he still hasn't made it. Now he loses to James Polk in 1844, and Polk becomes a very important president. All right. The Whigs were able to elect one last president, Zachary Taylor, but he also died in office. And afterwards, the Whigs lose almost all of their power. By the 1850s, they're heavily divided by the issue of slavery, and pretty soon after that, they fade from existence entirely. And one of the reasons for this was because a lot of the Northern Whigs become the Republicans. They become the actual Republicans that elect Lincoln. All right, but you need to understand that the very next election, now, we're talking way in the future to the end of the Whigs. The very next election, we're going to elect James Polk, who becomes very important, okay?